тематике SEO, за последние года 3-4, наверное.
Thank you very much. I started by passing around my book on Comic-Con external relations, which is on the 1970s, as Michael already mentioned. The topic of my presentation is CMEA's external relations, research field and ideas for system analysis. And the aim of my presentation is to take stock of the existing literature on the CMEA from the point of view of its external agency and external ties, and to elaborate how this topic could be synthesized as a subfield within CMEA studies. And in the first part of the presentation, I elaborate what can and indeed has been studied under the label of CMEA external relations. And then in the second part, I talk about why this systemization is necessary and very timely. So my aim is to conceptualize the CMEA within the research, for instance, of European integration and Cold War international relations, which are two fields that I work on, where so far the CMEA has not been as present as I should think it should be. And this presentation is a very short outline in my aim to formulate an approach within the study of CMEA, how it acted on the international scene. And what I mean by external relations. As an international organization, the CMEA had two roles. Firstly, its task was to mediate and coordinate socialist intra-bloc relations. And secondly, its task was to coordinate the members' relations with the outside world. For instance, in the following fields: technology and license imports, development aid, credits, trade. As we know, starting from the 1960s onwards, the CMEA's member states' trade with the market economy countries began to grow, as did their lending from Western institutions from the 70s onwards. And moreover, CMEA members were significant aid providers and creditors to the global south, as for instance, studies by Sara Lorenzini or Max Trecker show. But what, therefore, was the role of the CMEA on the international arena? Here we need to pay attention to the role between the individual member states and the CMEA as a whole. And I would argue that much of the literature that addresses or discusses CMEA has focused on either the member states' trade or external relations, or then it has focused on intra-bloc relations. That is, CMEA members' cooperation and trade with one another. And the analysis of its contacts with and policies towards the non-CMEA world has been missing. And this is the gap that I intend to address in this presentation and also in the systematization of CMEA external ties. Of course, the major reason for the lack of this type of research on CMEA external ties is obviously the fact that the CMEA did not have independent foreign policy making mechanism or authority to or jurisdiction over its members in foreign relations. And moreover, in the Soviet bloc, the security and political cooperation took mostly place under the Warsaw Pact. But I argue, and as research already shows, the CMEA did have an international presence and agency. And I'll next go through the ways in which the organization as such was connected to the outside world. Firstly, it needs to be noted that the CMEA Trans-Border Agency should be studied within a study of external relations, because it is not foreign policy analysis. The CMEA did not have a foreign policy mechanism. A similar distinction between foreign policy and external action can in fact be made within, or has been made within EU studies as well. During the Cold War, the European community did not have foreign policy competencies either, and its external relations were conducted on the level of trade agreements or accreditation to other international organizations. So in my effort to synthesize on what CMEA external ties is, I've grouped this approach into three main themes. The first one is CMEA's diplomatic relations to individual countries. The second is its participation in the activities of other international organizations. And thirdly, its trade, economic, financial, scientific, technical relations to third countries. To start with the first group, or the first theme, which is CMEA's diplomatic relations to other countries. In this set, we have studies and we have the studies already conducted and the following roles for CMEA. For the individual countries approaching the CMEA, there have been associates or observers or collaborators. And if we look at this from the CMEA point of view, this is then CMEA's enlargement or a presence outside its and influence outside its borders. As we know, the CMEA went through several enlargement periods. Albania and GDR at the very beginning joined, Mongolia joined in '62, Cuba in '72, and Vietnam in '78. And before gaining membership, Mongolia, Cuba, and Vietnam were actually observers first, and then concluded their full membership only later on. But there were many other countries that did not gain membership, although they had observer status within the CMEA. For instance, Yugoslavia is the most important one, perhaps, with the longest cooperation. China was also participating in some activities. In the 70s, you have Iraq, Mexico, and so forth. Also, the unique case of Finland, which had a cooperation agreement. It wasn't an observer, but it had a special mixed commission with Finland and CMEA members in the commission. So thinking about these two groups of countries, it would be a very interesting and crucial question to analyze further. Why did the observer status prove to be a way to accede into the CMEA for some countries, but not all? And on the other way around, what did these non-European members that joined the CMEA contribute to the CMEA that deemed their membership worthy? The second aspect is CMEA participating in other international organizations. According to the Charter of CMEA, it could establish and maintain relations with organs of the United Nations and other specialized international organizations. And the character and form of these relations were to be established by concluding agreements. And the Charter was amended in 1973 to even better define the pattern and conditions of CMEA external relations. For instance, the CMEA Finland cooperation agreement was signed and ratified in 1973. But during those negotiations, the need for the CMEA to better be equipped to deal with third parties was noted. So the CMEA also had the power to conclude agreements with other international organizations. Its interest in arranging relations with the United Nations and its forums dates back to the mid-50s. It took the first contact with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe already in 1955. And it had observer status in several UN organizations, such as the General Assembly from 1974. It had advisory status in the Economic Commission for Europe from 1975, and it has also contact with UNCTAD, UNESCO, and International Energy Agency. And finally, the third group of CMEA external ties are its trade, economic, scientific, technical, and financial relations to third countries. So in this group, we can include CMEA contacts to other industrialized capitalist countries as well as developing countries. This included efforts to coordinate trade or financial or aid relations to third parties. And another interesting field is financial ties. For instance, CMEA countries were major creditors to the Global South. In all of these cases, it is nonetheless crucial that we distinguish between what was the role of the CMEA members and what was the role of the organization as such. Since CMEA could not conclude trade agreements on behalf of the members, it could only sign framework agreements. Therefore, the sovereignty within these fields lay with the member states. What the CMEA tried to do is coordinate and therefore control and have a binding policy on these issues so that there wouldn't be independent maneuvering from the part of the countries. But there is a field in which the CMEA was actually also a creditor in itself. The International Investment Bank that was established in the early 70s and had its headquarters in Moscow raised hard currency loans in Western banks and with other creditors and lent this money to CMEA members. And the major beneficiaries were, for instance, Poland and Bulgaria, which had more restricted access to Western money. So the CMEA was part of the financial East-West ties and had a role through lending its poorer members Western funds. So what to do with the systemization? As was mentioned already, for instance, by Director Turina, the amount of materials on CMEA is vast, and therefore it is necessary that this field of CMEA studies is also proceeding towards specialization. And my object is to bring the field of CMEA external relations as a subfield. We need to systematically think what CMEA relations with the outside world is as part of the larger study field of CMEA studies. I work on the international history of post-war Europe, so particularly two fields are important for me. This is the Cold War history and European integration history. And this approach that I am now trying to systemize would be to contribute to discussions on those two fields, which I'm sure you have come across as well, are currently lacking, and how to address CMEA as part of the socialist bloc and not just individual member states. How many minutes do you have?
How many do you need?
6? Okay. Yeah. So in the systemization of CMEA external relations, I am lending from and following the cue from two calls that have been put forward in these fields to broaden the scope and bring the socialist agency into the study. The first approach is by Kiran Patel from Maastricht to provincialize or decenter the European Union from the broader story of European integration. And this was further conceptualized by Patel and Wolfram Kaiser to study EEC in its fuller international context. And for them, this means to study EEC's relations with the outside world. And what they are doing, and what I suggest that we do with CMEA studies, is to bring transnational history approach into the study. while some of the groups that I mentioned earlier, for instance, the enlargement, of course, that primarily would lay within the field of diplomatic history. But there are other insights into how the CEMEA had presence and had influence across its borders. So what I'm arguing for is that we need to systematically include the framework of transnational history to study the CMEA. Analyze the links, networks, contacts, influence and dynamics of how the CMEA was connected to the outside world. And this includes questions such as, what's been the effect of the interactions between CMEA and the various United Nations forums? Or what was the CMEA's influence on other collaborators? Or what kind of diffusion of knowledge and ideas took place in these forums? What influences traveled between the CMEA as an organization and other international organizations? What did CMEA representatives learn during these exchanges? And furthermore, I would like to finally note that there's a discussion, I would say, about whether the Comecon in fact was integration. And was there a contribution to European integration during the Cold War of the CMEA? And to start with, I would like to say that we need to broaden a definition of what regional integration is. It should be more than what the EU model is, which has started from 6 countries in Western Europe, forming the coal and steel community and then the European Economic Community up until supranational EU. So we should furthermore see other ways of integrating Europe. We should also recognize that integration is more than economic integration. It is collaboration, it is how things are done, not with what goal that is attained. It is, for instance, political economists Yevgeny Vinokurov and Alexander Lippmann have argued that in some economic organizations, the worth of being a member in this organization is not what the stated objectives are, but other factors, for instance, that meetings are easy to establish. They provide security for the members. So even economic organizations have other goals and other worth for the members than just purely economic integration. And moreover, as scholars within the Tensions of Europe project have claimed, hidden integration, other ways of uniting Europe, not just on the level of nation states, is an important factor in uniting Europe. Yes, so in my final words, what I would like to say is that I think we need to specialize our fields within the field of CMEA studies. This grows out of my realization a couple of years ago when I was in a panel with Mikhail and Alexei that these papers, they don't fit together. They are on Comecon, but they should not be in the same panel because they discuss very different fields of history. And I think this venue is, and the participants here are a remark to show that there are so many approaches within CMEA studies that we need to find a division of labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.